This is Make Something Cool. I'm Alex Sugg. Today, I'm really excited to be sitting down with Wes Kao, the co-founder of Maven, which is an incredibly cool online learning platform, which we will talk about in a bit. And before that, she was the co-founder of the altMBA with marketing legend Seth Godin and has helped many cohort-based courses for Outlier.org, David Perel, Tiago Forte, and many others. Wes, stoked to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. So I want to discuss learning in this podcast and untraditional forms of education. I kind of, looking in your background, you've really built an awesome career doing kind of untraditional forms of education. But I think first, I want to start with an idea of yours that I really like, and that is having a spiky point of view. And this originally comes, I believe, from a post from July of 2020. So let's start there. What does it mean to have a spiky point of view?
Having a spiky point of view is having a point of view that is your thesis on your function or your field or your industry. And it's something that makes your audience think differently. And the reason why spiky point of view matters is because it's very noisy out there, right? And it's getting noisier by the week. So every single platform, there are so many people trying to grow their audience, trying to, share their thoughts, share their thought leadership. And what you don't want to do is get lost in a sea of sameness, right? Kind of just drown with all the other voices out there. And so if you're saying the same thing as everyone else, then of course your audience is going to tune out. And so having a spiky point of view is really thinking critically about, what are some unexpected or unconventional beliefs that you've developed through personal experience, through being an operator, through, hands-on actually doing of your craft. And so, leaning into those spiky points of view is a great way if you're ever thinking about what should I write about for my next post, or what kind of content should I create, or how do I approach a sales prospect? It's not just for marketing, it's for sales too. If you hop on a call with a sales prospect and you kind of hash out the same thing that every salesperson kind of talks to them about on the phone, there's no reason why they should pay more attention, right? But if you lead by adding value and sharing your spiky point of view, that makes them say, I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Like I kind of need to go back and think about things now because of, the perspective shift that you just gave me. That's really powerful. It establishes the value that you bring, the credibility that you bring, and it instantly helps you stand out.
Yeah. What's a spiky point of view that you have?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. I have so many about so many different things. I think one is that most people overemphasize launch day. So they'll spend a ton of effort on this really big launch. They'll plan for it for months and it'll be amazing. And then, the confetti settles. And, a week after, you're kind of twiddling your thumbs thinking like, okay, well, what do we do now? We saw this huge spike in traffic, the launch was successful, but what's our ongoing plan for driving customers, for driving awareness, for getting people excited? And so I think that a successful launch is actually a great launch day, plus the ensuing months and year afterward still, being just as concerted of an effort. So that's one example, right? Because a lot of people will tell you, here's how to plan for a great launch, right? There's a lot of talk about product launches, launching your course, launching your, this or that. But I actually think that part is less important than spending more focus on a really foundational strategy that's sustainable and ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree with that. It kind of makes me think of, I'm sure you've heard the Peter Thiel, famous investor, but his question that he asks in all of his
Yes.
I believe the question is, what is a idea that you believe is true that no one else believes is true? And I think I probably missaid exactly what that is. But when I first read that in his book, 0 to 1, it was just such an eye-opening moment of like, oh, that is how you differentiate. And all of us have these things. It could be about big issues in life. It could be about societal issues. It could be about business. It could be about work. But I think having a point of view and not getting lost in the ocean of sameness, what you're describing, that is the only way to survive now. Because it's the only way to really separate yourself from the crowd.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's important to point out that a spiky point of view is not stirring the pot and dropping a hot take for the sake of it.
Right.
A lot of people will make
Peter Thiel
that.
does do that. So yeah, right.
Well, I think that's a common mistake because people think, okay, well, I want to be spiky, so I'm going to
Right.
say something that is, kind of controversial
Mhm.
and bold and like makes a sweeping claim. And if you can't back that up with logic and with a business case and with rationale, it's very surface level and it's kind of cringe. Like
Fully
you
agree.
see on Twitter, like people just making these really bold claims, or you're like, okay, that's not even true. First of all, it just sounds like an adage, right? Like an axiom, and kind of like it uses rhetorical structures, right? So with JFK saying, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So people will use structures like that where it's like, don't do this, do this, right? Or like
Mhm.
use kind of these common rhetorical structures and fill it with content that just does not logically hold water at all if you think about it for 2 seconds. So
Right.
don't do that, right? Like Spiky point of view is not just a hot take. It's something where you genuinely believe in it and you have proven it
Mm.
through your personal experience. So it doesn't need to be, the capital T truth, but it should be
Right.
your truth, something that you're willing to advocate for and have conviction in.
For sure. Yeah, I think if there's one, because I can get pretty annoyed when I'm like, wow, people are just kind of blindly following everyone into whatever, and it's like, what do you really believe? But then I get equally annoyed by the people who are just blindly contrarian to everything, and it's like,
Yeah.
you're actually just as silly the other
Totally.
direction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. No, I think that's really, really smart, and I think that that's a really interesting take. I mean, have you gotten any pushback on some of these spiky point of views in the past? I'm sure you have.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes to the territory of having a spiky point of view.
Hmm.
And I think it's part of the reason why more people don't share their spiky points of view, I would say, right? Because when you share it, you invite and open the door for someone to disagree with you.
Mm.
And the best spiky points of view have uh multiple counterpoints where someone could say, like, actually, I think the opposite, right?
Mm.
So it's totally valid if someone, going back to my example of my spiky point of view that launch day is overly, aggrandized and focused
Yeah.
on. I can imagine a bunch of marketers saying, no, actually launch day is really important. It's the day that kind of you're announcing, you're kicking something off. It sets the tone, right? You want to start off strong. Also, you can leverage all that traffic for ongoing growth,
Mhm.
right? So there's a bunch of great reasons why you should focus on launch day,
Right.
right? If your spiking point of view is about something that is not debatable, it's so obviously wrong
Mm.
that no one would believe it. It's not really that spiky. It's just common sense.
Right. Right. Yeah. Do you feel like you're resilient to those arguments? I feel personally I'm a pretty like I can get a little bit insecure and I'm overcoming this now. I'm working on it, but I like to be liked and I don't like to ruffle feathers. But I'm finding that I actually have very strong opinions that I think I want to share because I think a lot of people might share those opinions as well. And it might be cooler to actually connect with people. But I know that with that comes the cost of criticism and
Yeah.
critique and those things. Do you feel pretty resilient to that?
Well, everything that you just said, I definitely feel.
Okay.
And I felt them more early on. So I
Yeah.
think I've gotten better about sharing my spiky points of view and doing it with less, internal strife and worrying and like debate,
Yeah.
I think the more you do it, the more you're like, okay, actually that wasn't so bad.
Right.
And a bunch of people agree with me. So like, like there's gonna be people who disagree, but you're also gonna
Right.
realize a bunch of people actually share a point of view there. I think the thing that helps me is really making sure that I believe in the idea.
Sure.
Like, I don't want to just say something that will stir the pot. And then if a bunch of people come at me, it's like, was that worth it? Like, was that worth,
Right.
the stress of people coming at me? But if it's something you really believe in and people are offering counterpoints, chances are you've thought of those counterpoints and you have answers to them. So when people point out like, oh, well, what about this? Or I disagree, I have responses because
Right.
those are things I think about a lot. Like this was not a flighty random opinion. This is something that
Right.
I've been thinking about for years and have felt for years and then finally decided to share. So there hasn't been usually there's not pushback where it's like, oh wow, like that like came out of left field.
Mm.
But if there is, it's like, okay, well that's great because now this sharpens my idea and sharpens my thinking and helps point out a
Right.
blind spot. And speaking of ones that were a little spikier than average, I just thought of another one. I recently tweeted about how I think that most people who complain about their bosses being micromanagers, that there might be a chance that your boss is actually a micromanager. Fair. But there's also a chance that your work just isn't that good, that you're not that organized and you don't really communicate what you're doing. The work output is objectively not that strong. And so they have to step in, or they have to give you feedback, or they have to check in with you. And it's not them breathing down your neck. It's simply that if you actually stepped up in a couple areas, then they wouldn't, quote unquote, micromanage. And that micromanaging is actually, I think it's a very mislabeled term that, if anyone is checking in on you, or where you feel a little bit, imposed upon, it's really easy to just throw that label like, oh, you're being a micromanager, or I'm being micromanaged. Like, just let me independently do my work. Right. But it's like, objectively, there's a bell curve of competence. And like, we can't all be in the upper 10%. Right. Like, and this is not just like a value judgment on like, you are bad or you are good. There are varying degrees of skill-based maturity that we all have, right? Like, you might be better at some things, and so you operate independently on those things. And then there are other areas where you might need a bit more handholding, or more guidance, or more thought partnership, right? Or more checking in that you're not as on areas you're not as good at. And so like, this is something that I felt for years, and just was like, oh, I don't want to say this because I don't want people to come at me, like, it was just one of those things where I held off on saying it for a long time. I want to do a thread on this, actually, a longer thread, but I started off as a single tweet to kind of test the waters.
Yeah.
And the response was actually more positive than I thought. There were definitely people who disagreed, who were like, very strongly, like, as the manager, there's a power dynamic. So it's pretty much always your fault as the manager. Like, you either like didn't manage them appropriately, didn't set expectations, or like hired the wrong person, or you should let them go. Like, if they don't perform well after, additional training, handholding, et cetera, they might just not be a fit. So there were, some arguments like that, which is kind of fair. Like, I see that point of view too, right? So, but yeah, like that's an example of a good one where I thought the conversation and the comments were so rich. They were so interesting to see what other people were reacting to. It pushed my thinking. It felt really good to think about, how do I share this idea in a way that isn't just like an attack on people, right? Like, how do I share it in a way that is spiky, but also accurately represents the idea without overstating it or being overly extreme. So it's a good exercise for me too.
Yeah. I'll swim out into those scary waters with you. I think that's a really good take. And I think it's a bold take, because I think currently in society, if if I were to go tell my friend, or if someone was gonna come tell me like, gosh, my manager is such a micromanager, the instinct is to just be like, I know, I'm so sorry. Like, you're clearly just an amazing worker on your own. You clearly are just crushing it. You don't need anybody to check in. Why are they so mean? What is that? But it's like, the reality of the situation is, everyone has a different idea of what does micromanaging even mean. Like, could be someone who's like, gets told something once and they're like, wow, you're such a micromanager now. And so it's very like, in society, I think very culturally, like, a lot of people want people to like maybe feel kind of bad for them. But it's like, from a manager's point of view, it's like there are all kinds of ways that this could play out. And you're absolutely right. There are times when micromanaging is absolutely real, but that's probably not, maybe even the majority of cases. Like, and but I haven't really thought about that personally, but hearing you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, that's actually a really good take.
Yeah, I think being intellectually honest is so important for yourself, like for your own growth and for your own critical thinking. So when I reflect back on my 15 years working full time, there were definitely times, especially early on in my career, where I complained about micromanaging bosses, where I thought like, this person didn't understand me. I was working so hard. I was slaving away. Like, they didn't appreciate me at all. And they just, constantly were throwing work over the wall. And there were definitely times when, I've had managers that were actually bad, like threw me under the bus, blamed me for things that were my fault, like really actually gaslit me, like really actually bad. But then there were a bunch of times where in the moment I thought the manager was unreasonable, but actually I was unreasonable.
Right.
I did not let them know like what was going on in my world. I didn't communicate with them. I didn't share that I was struggling. I didn't ask questions when they assigned me something where I just then spent hours spinning my wheels figuring it out because I didn't want to seem dumb or less capable than they thought I was, right? Like I wanted to seem like the high performer that they thought I was, right?
Mm.
So there were a bunch of things that I could have done differently to show more ownership and to just manage the situation better, And at the time I was less mature, and it was just easier to just have the worldview of like me being a martyr, And so, yeah, so like I think that intellectual honesty is super important. That like, yeah, it's kind of like the Reddit subthread AITA. Have you heard of it? Am
I
I the
haven't heard of it.
asshole?
No,
Oh my God, it's amazing. So it's
that's
am I
good.
the asshole? And so I think there are, I'm gonna butcher this because I don't read it that often, but I love the concept of it. So it's basically like someone will post a situation and be like, well, I did this and my girlfriend did that, or my boss did this to me, or this happened to my neighbor. Am I the asshole? And then everyone on the internet will chime in and say like, you're like, yes, you are the asshole. No, you're not the asshole. Or like, no one's the asshole.
Right.
Right.
Or you're both assholes.
Or you're both assholes. Exactly. You're both assholes. Yeah. Yeah. I think those are the four. And I love this because it's so hard to tell sometimes, like, am I the person who needs to change or are you the person who needs to change? You know? And I think that our natural instinct is to assume that the other person is unreasonable.
Right.
That other people are unreasonable, but we are always reasonable.
Yeah.
Right? And like, if you just think about that, like that just doesn't make sense. It can't be possible that everyone else is always unreasonable and everyone thinks that about other people. And yet like we ourselves are always reasonable. Like it just doesn't hold,
Yes.
And so we have to admit that sometimes we might be the one that, we are the asshole in the situation, right? There's more that we could do to better handle something.
Yeah. You're like preaching to me. I feel like in 2022, especially like being an online creator, just being online in general, like intellectual honesty feels so risky. I feel like for someone to say like, I'm actually wrong about something, or I'm actually the one who's failing in this certain area, or I actually don't know what I'm talking about. Like that level of honesty feels so risky today. Do you feel like you're naturally intellectually honest, or is that a learned skill?
I think I tend to naturally be a more self-conscious person.
Yeah.
So, when I first started tweeting, so first of all, okay, so I joined Twitter, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago or something. And I had like, 500 followers for like 9 of those years. And in the last 2 years, I grew to where I'm now, 150,000 followers. So for most of posting online, I was completely obscure. No one read my shit, like, fine. But I was still so self-conscious. Like, I would literally tweet something and then delete it 1 second later because I wanted to switch the word order of something. Or like,
Right.
or I wanted to like change the last line of it. Like,
Right.
and so it took me a while to not, to evolve, to not be so self-conscious.
Yeah.
And so like, there are some people who will have a thought and then just tweet it and then not give it a second thought. Like, it just, something comes to them and they do it.
That's
I don't know
crazy.
what it feels like to
I
be
don't
that
either.
person, but
Yeah.
it must be awesome. But it's so funny because there's a great story of Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen. So 2 of the greats, right? Goats, both in their own right. And I think this was in the 1980s. I think 1984 they met up in Paris. Bob Dylan had just performed a show. Leonard Cohen attended the show, and then they met up for coffee the morning after. And they're talking about the show and complimenting each other on their work and one of them, Bob Dylan, asks Leonard Cohen, "Oh, so how long? Hey, I loved one of your songs. How long did you take to write? I think it was Hallelujah. Like, how long did it take you to write Hallelujah?" And Leonard Cohen says, I forgot some time frame. He says like 5 days or something, or 2 months, something like that. And then he asks Bob Dylan, "Oh, so how long did it take you to write one of your songs? I think it was called I and I." And Bob Dylan said, "Oh, like a day or two, like a couple minutes. Like it just came to me, right?" And Leonard Cohen was just like shocked and said, "Okay, actually, I lied. It took me 5 years to write Hallelujah. Actually, you know what? I butchered the story. Originally, it had taken him 2. I think he said 2 years.
Okay.
And then he had actually downplayed that already, and it had actually taken him 5 years.
Wow.
So what do you do with that, right? Like people interviewed Leonard Cohen afterwards, in the years after, saying like, what do you make of that? That Bob Dylan is so prolific, he writes so quickly, songs seem to come naturally to him, and it took you 5 years to write this song. And Leonard Cohen said, it's just the way the cards are dealt.
Right.
And I love that. It's so honest. Because it's like, what can I say? Like, do I wish I were kind of more of a natural sharer in today's day and age, especially? Yeah. Like, I think natural sharers have an advantage because being consistent with sharing, being prolific, tends to be rewarded by algorithms and audiences like, hearing from creators that they follow. So if you're someone who kind of takes longer to create or is more thoughtful or more self-conscious, it can be a little bit harder, but at the same time, Leonard Cohen also, is a legend.
One of the best.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So that the fact that it took him longer, his process was different and slower, didn't prevent him from reaching greatness. Right. And having a lasting impact on music. And being someone that Bob Dylan has repeatedly said that he admires. Right. So I think it's one of those things where as a creator, whether you create a podcast, whether you write your newsletter, you write content for your company, you write tweet threads, whatever, like all of this is creating YouTube videos, you need to acknowledge your own natural instinct and style, and the sooner that you can stop the self-loathing about your style, for me, like that was a big thing, right? The sooner that I stopped the self-flagellation about like, oh, I wish I were more this or wish I were more that, I was able to then lean into the things that I am good at and create a posting cadence that made sense for me, right? That felt rewarding and was also great for my audience. So I think really like not trying to fight your natural style or the natural medium that you want to be in. If you're more of if you like writing and you don't like being live on camera, like don't start a YouTube channel, start a Substack newsletter. Like there's so much room in every platform for winners and multiple winners. So lean into something that you actually enjoy doing, because one of my adages is that everything takes longer than you think. So this will take this and anything else you do to reach greatness will take longer than you think. And if you pick something that you don't like doing, it's just going to be too much of a slog and you're going to quit before you start to be able to reap the rewards.
100%. Yeah, that's so good. I'm curious, you kind of, you mentioned, so it was 10 years on Twitter or 9 years. And then 2 years ago, you saw this exponential growth. What did you change?
So for most of those years, I was not posting very often. Like I didn't post for, I think 5 years, a single tweet. So I just wasn't active. It wasn't a priority. And 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I started prioritizing it more and then posting threads.
Okay.
So that was really what changed. It was when I started Maven and realized that my co-founder, Gagan Biani, who co-founded Udemy, had a big audience at the time when we started the company. And it was so helpful for getting us our first set of customers, creators, just kind of showing up on the scene saying like, hey, here's Maven, with a bunch of interest, just like ready to go because people were excited. It was a channel where we could reach people who were glad to know that we now existed. And I really saw the power of what a platform could do to share your ideas, be a gathering place for like-minded people. And so, his audience was such an asset for us. And at that time, I think he had like 100,000 followers. And I think at that time I had like 10,000 maybe, because the year before that I kind of started posting. So I went from like 500 to like 1,000 to 10,000, and then in 1 year to 10,000 to 250,000. And yeah, so just thinking about it more as something to prioritize. I think that the thing that I struggle with and still struggle with as a creator operator, which I think many of us are, you're a creator, but you also have a full-time job, or you're a full-time founder, or you have, other projects, or consulting, or coaching, etc.
Right.
One thing that I struggle with a lot, even now, is switching between content creation mode and operator mode.
Right.
It's just a completely different part of my brain. And I know that there are people who do it more seamlessly.
Totally.
But for me, it is quite different. It's almost like, Paul Graham talks about maker mode versus manager mode, right? If you're a maker, and he's talking about it mainly for engineers who are, they need to block off time to get into flow to code. But then other times, if you're an engineering manager, you might need to manage people, project manage, manage up, etc. So it's similar. I think it's like two modes. Like content creation is so different. Even if on a daily basis, you are writing a lot.
Hmm.
Right. Like I
Totally.
write so much in Slack every day
Right.
to my team, right? To, to give feedback, to debate different ideas. I'm writing so much, but it's a different part of your brain than
Right.
content creation where you are sharing ideas to an external audience.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like that tension is something that I'm constantly trying to navigate.
For sure. 100%. I relate to that. And you're light years ahead of me in a lot of ways, but I do feel like these two parts of my brain, one being very operational, the other being very like creative or creator driven. It's very hard for those to coexist in like the same day. It's like very hard for me to be like, yeah, I think like it almost feels like an emotional or like mood more than anything. It's like my mood feels more like content today, and my mood feels more like operational CEO founder mode. Like it's kind of interesting how that works. But yeah, I think I'm curious. I do want to get a little nerdy about Twitter though, because that is a pretty drastic jump from even 10,000 to 150,000. So you attribute that to just Threads.
Threads is part of it.
Okay.
Posting consistently, posting high quality content every week at the same time.
Okay.
Is the real basis of that. And so, if you're posting once in a while, and it's only okay, like you're probably not going to see results. But being very systematic about it, I don't think I missed a week for like 9 months straight or like 10 months straight.
Gotcha.
So yeah, and I actually think one of the reasons I was able to do that was because I'd started writing my blog in 2010. And remember earlier I said that I was writing into the void. So
Yeah.
tweeting and posting blog posts into the void for many years. Even today, my newsletter and my subscribers are small, but I wrote very consistently for the past, how many years is that now? It's 2022, 12 years. And so we started Maven in 2020. In 2019, when I was consulting, I was a creator consultant, a creator operator then, I wrote 43 essays. And then in 2020, when we started Maven, 2020, I wrote 43 because we started Maven near the tail end of the year. And then 2021 was my first full year of Maven, and I wrote 5. So you can kind of see the drop off of like, okay, like when you switch from being a full-time consulting trader where you manage, your own schedule, I was a solopreneur, to running a company, like huge drop off. But basically, in the past 12 years, there were ups and downs with years where I wrote more and years where I wrote less. But it was very consistent with sharing my ideas and sharing different frameworks that I was learning and figuring out along the way. And so basically for over a year, my threads were blog articles and essays that I'd already written that I translated into a thread.
Smart.
So if I had to think from scratch on all of those different ideas, I don't know if I would have been able to keep up with that content cadence with that level of quality.
Right.
So like Spiky point of view, strategy versus self-expression, eyes lighting up, brand versus performance marketing spectrum, all of these rigorous thinking. These are all ideas that all these, all frameworks that I came up with before I even started tweeting, and each of those essays, there were some that took 40 to 50 hours to write.
Wow.
So these are things that like were heavy, labor intensive, like, efforts that were, that were very strenuous at the time and, but felt worth it because, if it's something that you've been thinking about a lot and you are constantly explaining to other people, get that down on paper, like you're already talking about it. Like this is something that is meaningful to you that you constantly refer to. It is so amazing, let me tell you, to be able to send someone a link rather than explain it from scratch every time and like drive yourself nuts because you're like, why don't you know this? Like, right? So you can just send someone a link and be like, oh, hey, I wrote more about this here, right? Or you give like a 1-liner or 2-liner and send them a link. To this day, my articles, I'm still doing that with articles. With starting Maven and shaping our culture and getting, especially when we were starting, helping new team members understand our culture, understand rigorous thinking, or right? Like Spiky point of view is now something we teach in the Maven course accelerator. We've had 900 instructors come through this 2-week free boot camp, right? And this is one of the first things that we teach them is Spiky point of view. And we link to my article, right? So were those dozens of hours spent thinking about the idea, writing it, making it really strong, gathering examples, sharing counterpoints and then my reflections to those counterpoints, like making it really hold water and making it really rigorous. Were they worth it? Absolutely.
Totally. Well, and it's kind of like you are, I think it's Sahil Bloom, which I think has done a Maven course in the past, actually.
Yes, he's a friend. Yeah.
Very cool. But he has this idea, and maybe it comes from James Clear. All the amazing writers out there, one of them says, talks a lot about like creating, opening up your surface area for luck. And what I'm hearing you say is like, even in this time that you are writing, putting all this effort, energy, and work into these articles, it's even if they weren't like getting crazy traction for you back then, it's insane to think of the luck you generated for yourself when you happen to find the channel, which was Twitter Threads in this instance, where it's like, oh, I kind of already did all the heavy lifting here to where I can, format it correctly, put it all into the Twitter thread the way it should be. And then all of a sudden you're like prepared for a year to just see exponential growth on your Twitter presence because you found the right like platform for the stuff you already did the hard thinking on. And I think I've experienced this recently with like doing this podcast for a couple years, and only recently did I sign up for like Instagram Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. And it's crazy because I have this whole back catalog of these amazing interviews I've been so lucky to be able to do. But now it's like, oh, I just have to clip down all these amazing people, James Clear, Jack Butcher, like Steph Smith, all these amazing people I've gotten to talk to. And now I'm starting to see like real growth with the show because all that preparation kind of in the past, now there's a format that's like, oh, this is like the accelerant that I've been waiting for. And I didn't even really realize it was there, but it's made my life so much easier because like I have a whole war chest of stuff that I've already done the hard work on that now I've found the right format to actually really propel it forward. And that's an interesting way to think about your work, because I think a lot of creators probably just stop when it gets hard, or they just stop when it's like, yeah, this isn't really catching on. But if you love something the way you loved writing articles, you were setting yourself up for the future and didn't even probably know it in a lot of ways, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to this idea that everything takes longer than you think.
Yeah.
And there really are no shortcuts. You know, like when you think someone has a shortcut, what you're not seeing is you're seeing the tip of the iceberg and not the whole iceberg underneath, because people will say, oh my gosh, like, how did Wes grow by, over 10,000 followers per month, like, right, for a year? And a lot of it was driven by the previous decade of thinking, writing, creating content, right, laying that groundwork with very little results. So yeah, it's definitely very encouraging, I think, I think the lesson there is to do something that you are obsessed with and would do even if people weren't reading it. Like with my tweet threads, for example, like I have some that hit and some that miss, but every single one I am proud of.
Yeah.
I can't control necessarily how many impressions I get or, what the algorithm is favoring or, right, a bunch of different variables. But I can control putting out high quality stuff that I stand behind, because that's my reputation. That's my credibility. It's a reflection of my thinking and my quality of thinking. So I don't want to just put out stuff that is going to get likes or is going to go, mini viral if it feels surface level, right? Or feels like pandering or, is one of those 99% of people use Twitter wrong. Like here's how to, here are the 50 accounts you should follow to blank. Like, right? Like there's so many seemingly shortcut ways to grow. And it's cool if you want to do that. Like fair. Like people have different, worldviews and value systems and whatnot. For me personally, the intellectual honesty and the rigor, the quality of thinking, like that's exciting to me, So that was really what I was excited about when I was writing, for the past decade. It was wanting to figure out this idea that I felt like was important, that needed to be shared, that influenced my work, that if I could share with other people could help them too. And so when you have that deeper purpose or like something else fueling you besides only audience growth, it becomes much more meaningful of a journey, and the content that you create is probably going to be better.
Definitely. And you will withstand the hard seasons of, oh, it's not working right now, or whatever working means, but it's like, it's not really about whether or not it quote unquote works. It's about whether or not I'm doing what's real to me and what feels good. So I want to move into learning and education a little bit. And I think looking at your background, you're clearly drawn, and you can correct me if this term is wrong, because it might be, you might not agree with it, but toward untraditional forms of education. Why is that?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it is I was never great at school. As a kid, throughout K through 12, in college, on the outside, I was a pretty good student. But it was because I was like a duck paddling really hard underwater, right? You're like
Right.
gliding along the surface, and people are like, "Oh, you're such a good student. Like this must come easily for you." But underneath the surface, I had a ton of private tutoring. I was going to a bunch of different like after school classes and like, group tutoring, one-on-one, right? And so it took a lot of help, external help for me to kind of like perform at a level where I think with some people it were better at school. Like it really did come naturally. I also think that my and like a bunch of people's brains work differently than what standardized tests and school curriculum expects.
Right.
So I remember, I think this was in the second grade, the teacher called my parents into the classroom. They were concerned. And they were like, well, Wes performed really shitty on this standardized test. And by the way, this happened like literally throughout, like STAR tests in K through 12, SATs, the GMATs when I was thinking about applying to business school, like shit, performed terribly on every standardized test I've ever taken. And so, flash forward, or rewind back to second grade. So the teacher called my parents in, and they wanted to talk about my reading comprehension skills. And they were like, okay, well, Wes like read this paragraph and had to answer these 5 questions, and her answer's like really weird, So this paragraph is about a story of a boy who is walking home. It's really hot. He's sweating. He walks by a lake. The lake looks very cool. What does the boy do next? Is one of the questions. Okay. Now, I'm proud to say I would know what the right answer would be for that, A, B, C, D, E. But back then, the right answer was jump in the lake, right? The answer I chose was go home. So in my mind, it made so much sense. And I every time I took standardized tests and got the wrong answer, I wish I could explain or like have a conversation with
Right.
the test writer so I could show my case, right? Like share my rationale, and they would see like, okay, fine, like I kind of get it, right? Like, so my rationale for that was lakes are kind of dirty, and my house has air conditioning and soda in the fridge. So if I'm hot, like I would just go home, right? So like I feel like there's school in general. This is such a good example of school thinking. People have to think in a certain way, right? Fit into certain boxes. Like your logic has to be this, this, and this. Whereas there are actually multiple right ways to get to an answer, right? With defensible rationale, right? And so, I feel like school just, it always felt kind of a little bit like a battle. And I distinctly remember, especially with math, that there were so many times when I felt stupid, right? And it wasn't just like, oh, I don't get this. It's a feeling of absolute futility, which I think is one of the saddest feelings. Futility, as in like the exact opposite of hope, right? Like you have some hope, like, oh, if I try really hard, I can get this. It might take a really long time, but I can get it. Whereas like futility is like, no, like there's no way you're ever gonna get this, And there were many times, especially in quantitative classes, where I felt that. And it was just so hopeless. Like I did not see a path forward. And it wasn't until after I'd graduated from UC Berkeley, I was working in San Francisco, when I decided to take retake Calculus 1, because I had gotten a C in it freshman year. And at that time I was applying to business schools, and all the top schools obviously want people who get good grades. It's kind of table stakes. It's like, who doesn't have good grades when you apply to top 10 schools, right? Like you have to do that baseline plus like show that you're a leader, show upward mobility and career progression, whatever. And so, so they saw this C, and then, other C's speckled with quantitative classes on my report card, my transcript. And one of the schools that I was really excited about said, we think you show potential, but your grades are just too bad in quantitative classes. So if you're willing to retake Calculus 1 to show us that that your math is actually decent, then we will take that into account when thinking about our waitlist. And so I decided to do it. And this time it was through UC Berkeley Extension in San Francisco. There were 6 or 7 people total in the class. Okay. The first time that I took Calculus 1 at UC Berkeley as an undergrad, there were 800 people in the class. So way smaller. The professor was amazing, and he made all of us sit in one row, in the front row, and every couple of minutes he would go from one person to the other asking a question. There was no, it wasn't based on us raising our hands, him randomly picking. It was just like, we're going down the line, and you're going to answer, and we're going to make sure no one is left behind. And this was such a stark contrast to pretty much like any educational experience up until then. And I ended up getting an A in that class. And, I didn't even end up going to business school. I ended up joining Seth Godin and starting an online business school instead with the altMBA. So it's kind of ironic, but that redemption story was just so important for me. And it just showed me that, hey, maybe I can challenge this idea that I'm not good at math, that I'm not good at school, I'm not good at learning, that maybe it's the learning format, right? And the way that the learning is presented. Maybe there's hope for me and others after all, And I think that's one thing that I'm so excited about cohort-based courses is that it's opening up, first of all, a whole new group of instructors, and Maven, we call them digitally native professors. So these are people who aren't teaching at a university. These are people with, real world experience who are operators themselves. Lenny Rachitsky, early product manager at Airbnb. It's, we have a former COO of Bridgewater Associates. We have former heads of UX at Walmart, behavioral design at Walmart, operators at Google, Meta, right? SparkToro, VPs of marketing at SparkToro. So really interesting backgrounds that are sharing their knowledge. Right. So that's kind of the instructor side. And then on the student side, the learning format side, it's opening up access by bringing all of this amazing expertise now online in this format where you are learning in community. You're learning with other people. You're talking about ideas. You're debating. You're role playing. You're getting feedback. You're actually, if you're taking a course on sales, you're not just reading about sales or being lectured at about sales or doing theoretical projects about sales. You're actually sending out DMs. You're sending out your cold pitches, seeing what the conversion rate is, adjusting your pitch, getting some feedback on it, and then sending out another batch of DMs. Right?
Awesome.
It's so much more real, and it reflects the way that we actually learn, which is by talking about ideas, which is by engaging with ideas, learning something, immediately putting into practice, realizing that you didn't learn it after all, because when you tried to implement it, it didn't actually work the way you expected, and then going back to the drawing board and learning some more and then trying, right? So I call this the learn, do cycle. So the old way was learn, do.
Right.
The new way is learn, do.
Yeah.
Right. You're alternating.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think humans always learn this way, but cohort-based courses are kind of bringing that to the forefront, bringing the best parts of in-person learning online with the scale and the accessibility that the internet provides.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely resonate with that personally. I was also horrible student. Math was also my downfall all through grade school. And I think in high school, I kind of learned that. So I barely passed. I was one of those kids who had 57% in my class. And I would go beg the teacher at the end of semester, hey, can I do 1 extra credit? But I remember, and my wife hates this story because she is a master's. She's this incredible student and she's really good at school. And I remember, I think I was a freshman in high school when it kind of clicked for me where my goal wasn't to learn. And I went to a public school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So pretty small town, but my goal wasn't actually to learn. My goal was to make the teacher like me because I knew come the end of semester, I could beg and plead and I would have a much better case of actually getting a pass. And it worked. I passed with a 2.3 GPA out of high school. But it became a social game to me, much more than an educational game, which was probably bad for a lot of reasons. But I feel bad even saying it out loud or admitting that. But it's just true. That's how I learned to approach school. And I didn't go to college. I briefly went and I dropped out just because I felt this is just not for me. This whole environment is not for me at all. And I feel like I felt in the moment like I am wasting my time. I'm wasting my life by being in these classes when I should be out doing stuff, like actually getting hands-on experience doing things. But what you're describing with the cohort based and learn do feels like I wish this was there for me back when, and
Mm-hmm.
10, 12 years ago, whenever this was, because it feels way more built for someone who thinks like me. And there have to be countless, kids turning into teenagers, turning into adults in college who need something else than what's honestly just like a failure in the educational system for a lot of students, and like not providing what they need. I'm curious, like I do feel like in online courses, there's a little bit of, at least for me, a little bit of like scammy vibes with like a lot of online courses. And I'm curious where like it's do this, buy my course for $200 or $300 and you'll become a real estate mogul or some crazy stuff
For
like that.
$97.97.
Always, that's the price.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
97. Yes.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like for you and where Maven is operating, how do you approach like both like positioning Maven, but also like your philosophy around like maybe where other online educational things like online courses have failed? Like how do you approach that problem,
Yeah.
or that perception that people might have?
Yeah. Online learning definitely needs a rebrand.
Yeah.
I think when you say online learning, the first thing that people think of are, what you mentioned, a lot of internet marketers who are a little bit spammy and, way more focused on marketing and selling their courses than having credible, useful, valuable substance to sell. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate. I think part of it is due to video-driven courses being the way that they are. So there's no engagement. There's less accountability that the instructor needs to bring to the table because it's one directional. So you record something and then you release it out into the world and then someone buys it. It's usually at a price point that's low enough where if it sucks, like, do I really want to fight for the refund or do I want to just move on with my life? And
well, there's a secret psychology to that too, to where if you feel ashamed that you didn't finish the course or you didn't get what you don't want to be the person who's like,
exactly,
I failed, so I need my money back.
Right,
so there's a psychology there too. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So like all these things don't really keep the instructor super accountable.
Right.
Whereas core-based courses flip the script on this. There's a very high bar to running a core-based course. You are, and the reason for it is because it's a bi-directional relationship. You are in a live setting where your students will ask you questions in front of other people. And if you can't answer them, it's kind of embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
So like it incentivizes you to have your shit together and to not sell, fluffy stuff that people are going to complain about and not be very happy about. The price points are also higher. So, with higher price points usually come higher expectations. So if you're charging $500, $750, $1,500 for a course, your students are coming in with higher expectations. So, I call it the content hierarchy of BS. And you can imagine a triangle, a pyramid, where the bottom are channels where there's more room for BS. And it's usually one directional channels. So Twitter, great example, 280 characters, say whatever you want. No one's, right? Like, right? And you don't have to defend it. Speeches, keynote speeches, right? You're up on stage. The power dynamic is one where you have the mic, you are sharing, right? And if your audience questions something that you're saying or like finds a logical loop in what you're saying, or it doesn't really make sense, it's not easy for them to push back. Right? Because you have the mic, you're on stage. Podcasts, another good example, like one directional, like you get to say what you want to say, right? And it's not that these channels aren't good. It's just that the format of them, there's more room and more leeway for lazy thinking. Of course, there are high quality podcasts, high quality speeches, high quality articles, books, etc. But there's a broader range for the floor, basically. Obviously, the ceiling is very high still. So now if you look at kind of the top part of that content hierarchy of BS, courses are a bit harder to BS, right? You have to have a lot of great material, books, courses, right? Stronger material. It's still one directional though. But coaching, consulting, now we're starting to get into, hey, like people are paying you good money and they want you to solve their problems and you are having a conversation. You can't just say something that sounds smart, right? People can push back. And then core-based courses also. up there
Yeah.
higher on the content target BS where there's less room for BS for all the reasons that we just talked about.
Yeah, for sure. I fully agree with that. There's plenty of I think the multi-directional feedback of like customer being able to directly communicate with the business and then both of them having to have their incentives aligned is huge. And I also want to just say there's so much bullshit said on podcasts. You're right there. And a lot of people believe a lot of bullshit from podcasts, and so we could use a little bit more multi-directional communication. But yeah, no,
Love it. Good spiky point of view.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, especially the past few years, it's just gotten crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think that all that makes a ton of sense, and I really do resonate with the cohort based, and I love the idea of like the multi-directional accountability of like a student. It's always been this way with online learning, but a student will get out what they put in, but a teacher it's always felt to me a little like, yeah, there's not enough accountability here, and it feels like the business model inherently has zero accountability with it, whereas this one, I love the idea of, you pay a premium because it's all live, right? It's like you're doing these courses with
it's usually a mix. There's live
Okay.
and some async. Yeah. So if there's anything that makes more sense async, then we'll do it async. So if it's a lecture, if it's a one directional lecture, if someone is just talking at you, you might as well turn that into a video. People can watch it on 2x speed, right? Be able to pause when they want to. And then the live parts are interactive. So we recommend instructors spend the live parts on discussion, live teardowns, right? So, cool. We have some instructors who will teach a writing course, and then we'll have their students actually write 5 headlines or write 5 tweet hooks or like write, whatever. And then they'll pick from what everyone just shared to do a teardown. Say like, okay, here's what you did well. Here's what you could do differently. I would trim this, move this up, right? And to kind of just share their thought process. So anything that's live, should be something that you can only do live.
Gotcha. That's cool. I think to close out, are you good on a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I wanted to we can kind of start wrapping up here, but around being a founder of a company, I would love to hear your experience in founding Maven, and you've co-founded other things in the past, but now with Maven, I'm just curious your experience, like what are some challenges you faced in being a founder of Maven, and how do you overcome them when they arise? Like maybe just give me high level, what is it like to be a founder of a company like this? Because it seemed like it emerged at this very ideal time during like right at the end of, I remember the launch. It was awesome. I was stoked on Maven. It looks great. Like this is a really cool idea. So your launch was solid, but I remember seeing it. But I'm curious, like it cannot always be easy. So I'm curious, like for your experience, what is it like to be a founder?
Yeah, I think that things are always messier behind the scenes than they look in public. So, there's a fair amount of messiness too, with things behind the scenes for us. I think the thing that I find challenging is that, there's all these things that in theory you'd want to do or like aim for. So like a tight feedback loop, right? Like everyone's gonna be like, yeah, like you want a tight feedback loop. But in reality, there are natural timelines for certain things where you can't necessarily rush it. And so for us, for example, court-based courses, students take a couple per year because it's a premium investment. It's they run from several $100 to low thousands, and also take time. And then instructors are running a couple times a year, so four times a year ish. And so if a course is running 4 times a year, that's a 3-month gap between one cohort to the next. So to get 2 reps, 2 cycles, that's 6 months, And so there are things like that where it's like, okay, ideally we would want a faster feedback loop to learn what's working, what's not, right? Like, is the strategy working? And I'm learning that there are things that you can't necessarily rush, that you make a bet and you use your judgment and you use your instincts and you use data and you make the best bet that you can, that you think is going to, be the best chance of success. But then like, you won't know if it works for 3 to 6 months, know? And I think that is actually more of the case than not with a lot of startups. Like you ideally want tighter feedback loops, but there are certain things where, and it's not just, within ours, because we have kind of a natural cadence and timing with courses. It's for it's for a lot of different projects where it takes a certain amount of activation energy to get that tactic going. You know, like if you like even using threads as an example, if you write 3 threads and then stop, are you going to see growth? Probably not. You might, you know, like you just didn't do it for long enough. Like you might need to do it for 3 months before you start seeing results, right? Your skill is going to improve during those 3 months, and your audience is going to realize that you're posting on a regular cadence. So, and you're just giving yourself enough reps to be able to, you know, have something that hits even, right? With 3, like what are the chances one of those is really going to hit? So I think that's interesting. You know, there's a lot of lessons like that where, you know, in theory, one thing, but in practice, you know, another. And, you know, I love the Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, you know? And so doing a startup is like getting punched in the mouth every day, you know? It's kind of fun, actually. One of our values at Maven is that hard work is fun. So it's kind of a nerdy, you know, I call them nerd thrills. It's a little bit of a nerd thrill. But you know, it's intellectually challenging, right? We're solving problems that have non-obvious solutions. If it were easy, someone else would have already done it. So yeah, it's supposed to be hard. You know, we're supposed to be trying to figure it out. So yeah, I think the journey of it and the attempts at trying to figure out is really exciting.
Yeah. Have you had any like scary moments when you're like, oh shit, I don't know if this is gonna work out?
Well, we've definitely had hypotheses that were wrong. So we did a relaunch just a couple weeks ago. And so the first time that we launched, it was, you know, I think like 3 weeks after Godin and I started the company. I don't even know if we found our technical co-founder yet. I think we had found him like a month later or something. So it was just me, Godin, and our first hire. We didn't even have a name. And we launched as Wes and Godin's new startup with a Notion page. And so it was really janky. And we hit the ground running. We were making revenue before we even had a name. And so, you know, we kind of started off really strong and started working directly with creators. And our hypothesis there was that people with big audiences were going to be the best instructors. That, you know, they had valuable content that they were already sharing, they had an audience, they can convert a portion of that audience to students. And we did this for about a year and a half. And we realized, you know, during that time, we also started working with a bunch of smaller creators. And so our sample size got bigger. And we started seeing a pattern that smaller creators were equally successful. It took a little bit more time for them to get going, but a lot of them were ready to hustle. They were willing to hustle. They wanted to build a course business. They had a lot of credibility, and they were, you know, many times just more excited about it than bigger creators who were simultaneously trying to grow on YouTube, simultaneously trying to start a fund, you know, and, you know, do this and that, write a job board and all these other things. And so we realized that our hypothesis of focusing only on creators was wrong. And so a couple weeks ago, we launched a new approach that we'd been working on for a couple months before that, all summer, on catering to subject matter experts, regardless of audience size. So not necessarily, you know, creators in the creator economy, but if you're an expert in UX design, in marketing, in FP&A, in you know, in finance, right, in people management, HR. All these topics that are very useful for working professionals who want to take courses and upskill. You know, we started shifting our focus towards experts and kind of, I wouldn't say shifting focus, I'd say broadening the focus. So we still, if you think about, you know, creators are still a circle within a larger circle now. Before they were 100% of the circle, and now we have a broader circle that encompasses creators, experts, executives. You know, a lot of executives, you know, are tired of kind of climbing the corporate ladder, and they want to be advisors to companies now, or they want to teach, or they want to consult, right? Something that's a little bit different of a pace. So we have a lot of instructors who are like that. And so, so that was a big shift. And then we also started catering to students. Before that, we were entirely supply side focused, instructor focused. We didn't think too much about the demand side of students. And so that couple weeks ago, we relaunched our website. So it's student facing now. So you can scroll through and see over 100 courses live in the next couple of weeks, looking for topics that you might, you know, be interested in taking. Before then, I think at any given time we had 5 courses maximum. So now it's, you know, magnitude more. And so, yeah, we updated our hypothesis, and we'll continue doing so. You know, we're going to see what works, double down on that. What's not working, stop doing that. And I think that's a very natural part of the process.
That's cool. Can I ask you one nerdy question, like super nerdy?
Yes.
So, okay, so I'm curious because it sounds like a really awesome pivot and it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious for, gathering leads now. I think having creators doing the courses, that felt like a very natural, like a really healthy lead generator for warm leads of people like who follow this creator. Of course, they want to take their course. Now moving more toward experts who might not have an audience. I'm sure you weighed that into the decision of like, so now how are you going to, what's your if you can tell me what's the plan now as far as getting leads from people who don't have a big following? Like, is it a totally different marketing style now? Like, what's the plan there?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely something that we're still figuring out. So there are trade-offs with this path. I think one thing that will likely be stable is that instructors will also have to put an effort into their marketing. Right. So, with just because we're a marketplace, right. Exactly. Doesn't mean that you just don't do any marketing. Right. Even if you think about video-driven courses on Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, Skillshare, right? Where a lot of people will say that it's passive income, quote unquote, that you make this course, then you start, just getting students. Those creators still had to drive those students too, right? Like once you recorded your course, you still had to actively have a marketing funnel and sales funnel that would drive eyeballs to your course, right? So I think in any course, there's always going to be it's always going to be better if the instructor is also actively involved and wanting to promote their course versus just kind of sitting back and letting naturally whoever finds them find them. So yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort with instructors also marketing their courses. We are also marketing them. Before, like, we were not even sending out emails to our list, and we have a pretty good list for not ever trying to build that list. But we were not consistent about surfacing interesting courses to people, or right, like we were not consistent about reaching out to people who had taken a course to suggest other ones, right, that are adjacent in topic, right? For so sure. There's so much low-hanging fruit of things that we're starting to do that I think are going to continue driving a bunch of eyeballs to the Maven website, so that that discoverability piece becomes something that instructors are excited about.
For sure. And I also think too, it's almost like, you might be foregoing or now expanding the pie a little bit to where it's maybe less focused on gigantic audience, but it's like maybe for a subject matter expert, they could have a very, much smaller audience, but it's just a way deeper connection to that audience, to where it's like, oh, if you're, if you have 1,000 people who follow you very, very closely and really give a shit about what you think and say, that's a great way. That's a great pool of people to sell an online cohorted course to.
Totally.
So it makes, I think I could definitely see that working really well.
Yeah. And if you think about the alternative too of self-hosting your course on your own website, let's say, or on your own URL, where you're kind of an island and you're responsible for driving all the top of funnel eyeballs, like it's very, very hard, right? Whereas at least if you list somewhere where naturally, a bunch of people every day are already coming as a destination to look for courses with that intent to find something they want to learn about, it gives you a leg up. So definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Well, no, that's awesome, Wes. And I really appreciate you being on. We'll wrap up here, but I mean, where should people find you? We talked a lot about Twitter, obviously Maven. Everyone go check out those spots. But is there anywhere specifically you want to send listeners?
Yeah. So check out maven.com and at MavenHQ on Twitter. And then I'm at Wes_Kao on Twitter and also on LinkedIn too.
Awesome. Wes, thank you so much for being here. And thanks to everybody for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to get more of these conversations sent to your inbox, head over to alexsug.com, sign up for the newsletter, and always get updated when a new episode drops. Last but not least, this episode is edited by Josh Perez. If you are looking for help with your podcast, Josh is your guy, a great producer, and an even better human being. Get in touch with him at justjoshperez.com. I'll be back soon with another new episode. So until then, go make something cool.